Welcome to Arnie's Class Podcast. I'm Arnie Aniel. I'm an HR development consultant, an international public speaker, a workshop facilitator, a coach, and an educator. Life is a great opportunity, and we all learn life lessons every day. This podcast is all about those lessons. Lessons like gratitude, confidence, happiness, mindset, and a lot more. Learning without action is information. Learning with action is transformation. Join me, learn, and transform yourself into a better you. Hello, life mates and listeners, and I'm very excited for this episode because we're going to talk about sex. This topic is very interesting, and at the same time a topic that not everyone is really comfortable to talk about, because there are many myths or wrong beliefs, if I may say, about what really sex is all about. And there are many things in our life that suggest more negativity towards sex than positivity. I'm sure a lot of you there, listeners, who grew up with very bad beliefs or bad attitudes towards sex, and I'm sure it has an impact. Those beliefs, those attitudes, they have impacts on your sex life. It's a huge topic that I don't think we can discuss in a minute, 5 minutes, or even an hour. Probably it will take not hours but days, because there are many aspects of this topic that we can really discuss. And I believe that my guest for this episode with this topic is someone who is an authority with experience, background, and qualifications to discuss this topic. I really hope that you will be able to learn something from this episode, because I myself, I have started reading more and more about sex because I want to become a sex therapist or a sex educator in 3 or 4 or even 5 years from now. It's a topic that I'm very comfortable talking with my friends or with people, even those who I really don't know. And that comfort that I have in talking about sex really drives me to learn more about it and to become a part of those sex educators and sex therapies who help people. Religion, social norms, incomplete information, and lack of education are just some of the factors, or if I may say, elements that really affect our attitude, behavior towards sex. I'm very excited for this episode, not just for myself, but for everyone, because I'm very sure that we will all learn from this episode. Life mates and listeners, enjoy listening in today's episode and learn. Life mates and listeners, in this episode, I'm thrilled because I'm going to talk about a topic that I'm really interested in. My special guest was born in the US, and she has lived and worked in different countries, including Thailand. She used to work as an ICU nurse after her degree in arts, and she has a master's degree in psychotherapy. She worked for almost 20 years as a sex therapist, which also includes couple and individual therapies. I'm very excited. Please welcome Kerry. Hi, Kerry. Welcome to Arnie's class.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. Kerry, I'm very excited. So let's start the ball rolling. I just want to
Okay.
ask you, Kerry, if someone asked you, how do you define sex? How will you answer that question?
Wow. Um, okay, let me just say this. I'm an old woman,
Okay.
and a lot of people don't understand that by the time you get to be my age, sex is very different, if at all.
Okay.
And every night, I kiss my husband's hand and tell him I love him. And that's sex to me. It's intimacy, it's bonding our love together. So to me, sex is a very broad subject. And certainly when I do therapy with people, I dispel some of the myths about sexuality, and everybody wants to be perfect, and everybody thinks they know a lot about it, but in fact we're never taught very much about it. If you get any sex education in school, it's basically how not to do it, because you're
Yes.
going to get STDs.
I totally agree. I totally agree.
So nobody talks about what it's like to be sensual, or what it's like to have to link that sexuality to intimacy. And those things usually take a lot of time, and that's what people nowadays don't have. And they tend not to spend a lot of time with sex. There's a lot of, especially if you have children, there's just not much time for intimacy. So a lot of what I do is to bring that into the whole equation of, you need to respect it as much as it deserves, because sexuality is the thing that bonds people. Your own sexuality as a single person, maybe, like how to pleasure yourself, how to consider yourself still a sensual human being, even though maybe you're not in a couple situation. But that, if you have that idea about yourself, that you're sensual, then a lot of things become sexual in your world. And sometimes it can be, quite fulfilling, even maybe as a single person, to have that attitude about yourself.
Yes, I love that. Yes. With your experience, and I believe most of your experience as a sex therapist is actually in Thailand. Is that right?
Yeah, I worked in Saudi Arabia before for
Oh,
a
I
couple of
see.
years. So it was there as well. And that was kind of weird.
Yes, Saudi Arabia. With your like years of experience, what is the common problem among couples in terms of sex or sexuality, if I may say?
Well, there's a lot of different manifestations of these problems. And it does usually come down to time. A lot of times, I mean, I worked in Bangkok for a long time, and so it has its own problems. A lot of the sex therapy I did was getting people to reconnect after cheating had happened. Because after all, it's Bangkok. So there was
Yes, I would say yes to that. Been here for a long time too.
so there was a lot of it. And a lot of times, once there's been cheating, there's a lack of trust. And for women, sexuality, trust is a big issue in intimacy. And to reconnect that trust, to get that trust back again, takes a while. But also to, when there's been problems in a relationship, quite often the sexual part of it drops away very quickly. Not always. I mean,
But most of the time.
I've had people who loved makeup sex. So they would fight all the time so that they could make up.
Oh wow. Oh wow.
Yep, there's that. And so my job in that situation was to have them reconnect when things were going well, and they didn't have to have this volatile situation, in their relationship before they could have great sex. So that was like, kind of a dual focus then, to focus on the relationship, focus on the sexuality, and then bring them together. But I would say most of my work was reconnecting people after there'd been cheating. I mean, I had a lot of other things too, but that was the main thing.
I see. Thank you for sharing that. But the problem is more on women or more on men? Because I believe a lot of us, there are many negative things, or at least in my opinion, about women than men. It's like there are more acceptance about men's sexuality than women's sexuality. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Mm, I think, well, oh, it's so complicated. You know, a lot of times women will present who have been sexually abused.
Oh,
And there's a lot of that. And if there's sexual dysfunction, for instance, vaginismus, which is, you know, when the vagina just clamps down and nothing can get
yes.
in, that quite often, if you delve deep into it, there's a sexual abuse element to it. Not always, but quite often. For men, I always see men in a bit of a different light in that there's so much pressure on you guys. Because after all, you know, if you can't get an erection, then it really doesn't happen. I mean, it can still, but it, you know, people don't see it as that. And so I think men tend to buckle under the pressure quite often. And then you get, you know, erectile dysfunction or, you know, a few other types of things. Sometimes premature ejaculation will be a stress thing. So it's just very different, I think, between men and women. Women always need that trust element. We make up stories in our heads about what this intimacy, even in a one-night stand, there will be a story that women are running in their head, because to have that trust to be able to let a man in is a big deal. Now, for men, that's not true, really. Generally, I'm sure that there are very sensitive men out there who consider trust a big issue. But on the whole, you know, men don't really care.
They just want to release and then get it done.
You know, you guys are kind of goal oriented, and the goal is the orgasm. So, you know, hey.
Yes. But as I've read from the book, or from books that I've been reading about sex and sexuality, they said that most women don't have really orgasm. What can you say about that based on your
I
experience?
would say it's most women. I have been surprised, you know, after doing this work for a while, of how many women don't have orgasms. I didn't expect to find so many, but I wouldn't say most. No, most women do have orgasms. And in fact, most women pleasure themselves. And I think that that's one thing that, you know, society doesn't like to see, and we haven't really been prepared for it. You know, we have a terrible sexual history of, you know, what has happened to us in terms of sex. For instance, you know, in the US, not that long ago, if a woman liked sex, they were considered crazy.
Yes.
So, you know, there's been a lot of misinformation, information driven by men. One thing that is a really good kind of education thing is the series Masters of Sex, because it's the story of Masters and Johnson, and they dispelled a lot of the myths surrounding women. And it also addresses a lot of the pressure men have. And we can't even do that research anymore. It's against the law now, because it was just so radical.
Yeah, I know. Kerry, you mentioned about that women pleasure themselves. And like for me, growing up in a Catholic country from the Philippines, and even like I'm in Thailand, I've been here living and working here. Still in Asia, it's not acceptable to know that women actually pleasure themselves. Can you tell more about that?
Yeah, the Thai female clients I've had, I can say mostly don't. And it's something that I tend to counsel people to do. And sometimes breaking down those barriers is difficult. It's just like sex toys here, you know, which are like vibrators and things like that are against the law. You can still get them, you know, down in Sukhumvit markets. And
Yes. Soy Nana and Silong
yeah,
Road. Yes.
but which tells you something about the fact that, there are women out there doing it.
Yeah.
So, but, just that attitude of that, the sex trade is so prevalent here, and yet you can't use sex toys. Sex toys are against the law. Says a lot about the society itself, and how we view ourselves as individuals and, human beings with human desires and those sort of things, the ability to fantasize and all of that. But yeah, I agree with you. In Asia, it is a bit more difficult. My job is a bit more difficult because of that. Because if women are not having orgasms, quite often I will prescribe a sex toy for them so that they can find out where their pleasure points are before they're with a man. Because if you don't know your own body, then how can you communicate to another person what it is that, pleasures you, what you like and what you don't like. And the whole process of sex therapy is based on sensate focus, which means it goes very slow, and you are learning about your body. Even if you've been together for years and years and years, that exploration at the beginning of sensate focus is very powerful, because rarely do we take the time, and we don't do the communication involved in, teaching the other person what you like and what you don't like. I think men especially assume that they know what women are about, but
they don't know.
No. And as a nurse, and especially the kind of nursing that you did, that the female structures are so different in women. They can be all over the place. I can remember when I was training and I first catheterized, we were going to catheterize women. And, we were shown the diagrams and where to put it and how to do all the sterilized things and all of that. And you get in there and you start catheterizing. Those structures can be all over the place. I mean, I catheterized a woman whose urethra was inside her vagina. So, we're very, very different. And what we like, our G spots, all of that sort of stuff is very different in different individuals. So it's very hard to generalize about things about women. And I'm sure, men are the same to a certain degree, but I don't think as much as women. And men don't learn as much about women as I think women do about men. It's not that we don't, we may not know when you first start having sex, like what to do with all that stuff, but it's very much, we're very perceptive about, what pleasures a man and that sort of thing. Whereas I don't think men are quite as involved in that perception process
compared to women.
Yeah, which is why sensate focus is such a great thing, because it draws the focus to that.
But how will you encourage women to be involved or do those pleasure themselves if they have this strong belief that it's against their religion?
Well, I don't push really hard. I have always been focused on multiculturalism because I've lived so many places in the world. And I am very respectful of that and respectful of religion in general. But I do encourage them to communicate more about how they feel and what makes them feel sensuous. And sometimes I can get them past that. I can get them, but they are willing to go past those boundaries that they seem to have. And it's weird in a society here that where there's so much sexuality on the one hand, and then very modest behavior on the other. It's like a black and white sort of situation. And I've had men tell me, who go down to Nana or whatever and say, Thai women are just so open that it's wonderful for them that they're so open with their bodies and they know what to do and, all of that sort of stuff. And yet, on the other hand, most of the population that live outside of Bangkok are not like that. They're modest and
Total opposite.
yeah, yeah.
But what differences did you see among women from different countries? Because like you've been in the Middle East, here it also in Thailand, in Asia, and also in the US.
Well, I've lived in the UK for quite a while. I
Yeah.
lived there for 10 years as well. And even though I wasn't a therapist there, I can tell you, and I'm from California, my husband's from England. So I can tell you that the cultural differences are really, really.
I can imagine, Kerry.
He was, he just, was very much more closed off than I was. A lot of it's personality too. I think we talked a long time ago about personality and how I have this theory about passive and aggressive, and I'm aggressive. He's very passive. But also it's upheld by his culture, that whole thing that, that old fashioned saying that, oh, no sex, please, we're British. That is very much still alive. At least in our generation, it was still alive. And so that modesty, and dealing with two people who have very different modesty things. And, this is true in Thailand too, when you have one partner who is from the West and one partner who's from Thailand and maybe not, involved in the sex trade, then you have that thing, of getting over that. And a lot of times women, if I see them as a couple, they'll want to I don't want to say improve themselves, but they'll want to get over that barrier for the sake of their partnership. So, and that's even been true in lesbian couples. I've had lesbian couples who just have totally different ideas about barriers to sex and how to get over that. And then sometimes there's women who are just not comfortable being a lesbian, but that's who they are. And so that brings in that whole identity thing and, to express themselves sexually, that is so much a part of their identity. It's really important to have them maybe open up a little and have the other partner maybe not be so wild to accommodate that kind of growth into the relationship.
That's very interesting, Kerry, that they identify themselves, but at the same time, they cannot fully express.
Yeah.
And they are not comfortable who they are.
Yeah.
Interesting. And you mentioned about pressure about with men, because you said it's about pleasure with women, but pressure on men. So what are those pressure that you're talking about?
The pressure on men, of course, is being able to get an erection. And so that, that pressure it's huge. Men have a lot of pressures. One of the things that I've noticed over and over and over again, I see over and over and over again, when there's been cheating, I will kind of trace it back to, okay, when did you first feel like that? Because they'll always feel inadequate or alienated or something, relationship great. And then they'll start feeling bad about themselves or lonely, usually lonely. Why? Almost every time it's the birth of a child.
Oh.
And you would think that would be such a joyous occasion. It would bring the two people together and all that. It's not what happens. It might happen, at the hospital, but it's not what happens on the day-to-day living, because women, they have a lot more to do. And a lot of times that baby doesn't sleep at night. And the couple has to accommodate another person in their lives. And for men, they get hyper vigilant about work. I think it's that provider instinct that they start working like crazy. So they'll work way more hours. And then here she is at home, not sleeping, maybe breastfeeding, all that sort of stuff. And then they just don't get together. And he starts feeling very rejected. And quite often that's where the seeds of cheating starts. And so I think men in general kind of innately have a lot of pressure on them. And then the pressure to get an erection as well is a big deal. And if they have any problems in that area, then, they take it into their self-image. I'm not very much of a man, all those kinds of things. So in my work, I get very much into what's really going on, up here, not just, oh, I couldn't get it up. That's not where, that's only the presenting symptom. It's not really what is happening.
There's something else.
Yeah, there's always psychology behind it. Even vaginismus as well. There's always psychology behind it.
There's one thing about when you're talking about pressure on men. One thing that I know of is that normally there's a belief that men are knowledgeable and skillful in sex. That we always have to perform, that we have the ability to do it well. Have you met men who are actually in a situation wherein they feel that they are not really capable of doing it? And then there's the pressure.
I don't think most men would admit that. Not until we dive deeply into it. But I know that to be a fact, just like what I said, that, we don't get sex education the way it should be. Men don't learn about women. They don't learn. I mean, we certainly don't have sex education for homosexuals, for instance. There's no place to go for a knowledge base except for maybe the internet. And then that gets kind of crazy sometimes.
Oh, too much information that you don't know which one is which.
Well, and it bleeds into porn, which I'm very anti-porn. I'm not somebody who, sex therapists, there's two schools of thought. There's the porn school and then there's the non-porn school. And I'm the non-porn school. And it's not because I'm prudish. I'm not, not at all. It's that it can be addictive. And it's also that it's not realistic.
Yeah.
And it's also focusing on the highest kind of excitement, which doesn't, it's not then the journey. It's just the focus at the end. And so, I've seen some where I just kind of go, I've never seen those angles before. How can that? I begin to not understand it because I think, how can that be titillating? No, it's it's not something I've ever seen before, so I can't relate it. But
very unrealistic.
Yeah, because I'm a woman too. But I don't use it because it can be a problem. The expectations that porn puts on the let's say it's a guy, watching porn, the expectations that it puts on the woman to have a certain type of performance, which, I mean, women are capable of that, obviously, but it's not the norm. We're looking for safety, we're looking for trust, we're looking for intimacy, and then, you're expected to be this sexual animal. It doesn't always connect like that. Now, that's not to say I haven't had clients who are, the women have been very creative and, wild things. They are. So there's an array of women, but that expectation that they should be like that or highly, highly seductive, it's just not like that. It's not realistic. And so it then heightens the expectations of men on what women should be like. And the opposite as well. If women watch a lot of porn, they expect men to be
to perform the same in the porn.
Huge and erect all the time. It's just not like that. So um, one of the great myths that I come across all the time is that when people get together in a certain age group, like say up until 40, and the hormones are going on. When you're young, they're just raging, and it's all about procreation. It's about having babies, so sexuality is just makes you crazy. In fact, we therapists call it the psychotic period of a couple's relationship. And as you get older, and it doesn't have to, like, I'm not talking about my age, it's like as you get closer to 40, those hormones fall off more and more and more. So that, people that get together at a young age, they have these expectations of their sex life to be wild and woolly all the time. And that may not be who that sexual person is underneath these hormones. It might be that, one person is okay with twice a month, and they'll always hark back. The other person always hark back and go, God, we used to do it every day.
Yeah, and now it's
And
changed.
this isn't what I signed up for. I don't want to wait for weeks before we have sex. And so it's not a realistic, kind of attitude. It's not, we have a lot of expectations, not only on sexuality, but just on relationships in general.
I see. And you mentioned about the barriers, Kerry. What are the common barriers? If you can name at least 3 barriers, what are those?
Well, the first two that we already talked about, culture and religion, are big ones. They're huge,
especially in Asia, I'm sure.
Yeah. And other places too. Very, very Catholic countries like yours. Well, there's a lot of countries like that in Europe. And so, that religious thing, the cultural thing, and then I would just say expectations, that we have unreal expectations of each other in relationships. I know, so I come from a time, where, my mother said to me, I was always academic. I loved learning. I was a great student. I was child of the 60s, so I was wild and crazy too. But I got straight A's anyway, But, she said to me, I was looking at universities to go to. And she said, yes, I want you to go to a really good university, but why don't you do your undergrad here, because it's cheaper, and in the States it's really expensive. And then we'll look for another school for you to do the second 2 years, because we do 4-year programs. And she said, I want you to go to a good school that has an engineering department. I said, well,
I know where's this going. I can sense.
I want to do that, my interests were in psychology, in, art, in, and why would I want to do that? She said, oh, so you could find a good man. Yeah, and that was my mom, and that was typical. That was typical of, her age group, my age group, my sort of, and this is why the 60s happened, because we were fed this kind of information that just like, what, and so women began to emerge and saying, we might want to go to a university that actually is where we want to go.
Yes, that's right. Not because. I see. So religion, and then of course, just you already mentioned expectations. Can you name another one, Kerry, aside from religion, expectation? Culture.
Yeah, culture is a big deal. Like for my husband, his culture is like, they'll do. Are you familiar with the term double entendre? It's like you're saying something, but it's got like a hidden sexual connotation to it. But you won't come right out and say it. It'll be, kind of covered up, but everybody knows what you're talking about. They love that stuff. They won't just come out and say it. And I've always been the kind of person where I really didn't respect those boundaries. I would meet somebody, I would get close to them very quickly. I mean, there's no mistake that I became a therapist. I've always been like this. People always told me their problems. I got very intimate with people very quickly when we're talking about problems and things. It was always in my psyche. And as a nurse, when I stopped nursing, that was one of the main things that I missed so much, was that I didn't have those very deep conversations anymore.
With other people.
Yeah, you meet people at parties and it's all superficial. And I can't do superficial. I'm not programmed like that. And so very quickly I would say, oh, and so how's your sex life?
And then they were like, what?
Yeah, like the Brits would go, whoa, but most of them would tell me, it was like a safe place. And one of the things I've noticed about being here is when I'm counseling British men, they'll come to therapy like a dog going to the vet, like pushing back the whole way, and the wife will be going, no, you're going, but as soon as they get in, it's like, if I am skilled enough to push the right button,
there you go.
It all just comes out. And a lot of times the wife will be looking at him like, what?
It's good that they ask what instead of who are you?
Well, there's that too.
Okay. Oh, wow. What an experience. I'm really excited to hear more about that. But of course, I have more other questions.
Okay.
Can you compare, like, at least, when was the last time because now you're a retired, and when was the last time you worked, Kerry?
I still have clients.
Until now?
Yeah, I can't, I don't want to be very open about that because I actually closed my practice and stopped my business. But I still do see clients. A lot of times I've got one in the US at the moment. I've had them in the UK, mainly people who have left here and then didn't want to go through finding a
new
therapist.
A new therapist.
Yeah, especially in Europe, it's really expensive as well. So I'm cheaper, so they'll keep coming to me.
Maybe that's the reason.
Yeah.
Joking. So all these years, what developments, or maybe what are the changes that you observe in terms of sex, especially for couples?
Not much. It's kind of the same things.
Still the same.
Yeah. I think maybe gender identity is a little bit more open now. And I can say, especially here in Thailand, when I get homosexual couples or lesbian couples or transgender, they tend to be quite open about who they are. But having said that, they still have the same identity issues that they had from a long time ago, that people a long time ago had, even though they're out, they're, sometimes exploiting it. They will still have insecurities
about themselves,
about their choices. Yeah.
But can you see any difference, because you already mentioned about the homosexuals, the lesbians, transgender, any difference in terms of sexual relationships to heterosexual relationships?
No.
The same.
Of course, there's some difference. There's gonna be, but there's always an aggressor and always a passive person. There's always that, or dominant and recessive, however you want to look at it. I don't really like dominant because I have seen passive people be very dominant, like manipulative over a more, aggressive person, because aggressors tend to not, both personalities tend to have issues about who they are. Self-acceptance is a big deal. And I know, like, for me as an aggressor, I can hear myself sometimes, like at a party or when I first meet something, just being too much for somebody. and I'm very aware of it now, and especially being a therapist, I'll back off a little bit. And that's really what I counsel people to do, that the aggressors have to come down a little bit, instead of being out there pushing and,
Doing all
yelling
those, yeah,
or whatever they're doing. And that the passive people come up a little bit, that they have to take a deep breath and go, okay, here I go. I've got to say it, that sort of harmony works the best, certainly in communication, and I would say in relationship in general. But there's always going to be those that issue is, from what I've seen, it's always there. There's a lesbian couple from my past that I've seen that there's an aggressor and there's a passive person, and they still have the same misunderstandings of each other that a heterosexual couple will have. And the same with with men. It's always there. There's a passive and aggressor.
Can we say, because I'm sure you've heard about it too, that opposite attracts. So
Yeah.
can we say that a passive person and an aggressive person will always be a good match, or it doesn't
Always.
have to?
Always, because now this is on a continuum as well. Extreme passivities over here, you can't see my hand, over here.
Okay.
And the aggressor, the end point is over here. My husband and I are at the extremes, but a lot of people are somewhere in between. And there can be people that are just one's a little bit more passive and one's a little bit more aggressive. And then, that's not the end all and be all, because culture also has a lot to do with it. And one of I would say, the most prevalent Thai woman client that I've had is an aggressive personality in this culture, because they don't do well in this culture.
Exactly.
They're not supposed to be angry. They're
Yes.
not supposed to be the driving force. They're not supposed to be pushing boundaries. They're not. And that's everything that aggressor does. I mean, that's the good things and the bad things. We have a high level of anger usually, but with Thai clients, I'll say, so does that make you angry? They won't even really understand what angry is.
Yeah. Yes, I can totally relate to that, Kerry. I can totally relate to that. But are your clients aware that they are passive and their partners are aggressive, or the other way around? One is
Almost never. And that's the first thing I do when I'm doing couples therapy, is I will ask the question, if you're walking down the road and you come up against a brick wall, and the brick wall goes all the way down on the sides of the road, and written on the brick wall is fear, what would you do? Would you turn and walk away, or would you punch a hole in the wall and walk through it? And when they have to sit and think about it, they'll think, oh, I'd turn and walk away, passive. Oh, I'd get angry and punch a hole in the wall,
aggressive.
But I think the passive people don't understand that aggressors have fear as well. We all have fear.
I totally agree on that, Kerry.
Yeah. And then they think that, they'll say, oh, but, my husband's not passive because he gets angry. Oh, passive people get really angry sometimes. But it's usually after they've pushed it down and pushed it down and pushed it down, and then they explode like a volcano. That's where the anger comes from. Whereas aggressors tend to be angry, we'll just go, and it'll be over for us. We'll go, what's the matter? What did I do? And the passive person will be going, And the one thing I hear about women, and I certainly found this out myself, because I had the program that I went to for psychotherapy, I had to be in my own therapy the whole time, and it was 5 years. So I've been in a lot of therapy. And
so you experience it yourself.
Yeah, that they also don't want to turn out anybody that's really loopy and has big problems to go and try and help other people. And especially since you have your diploma on the wall, everybody knows what university you went to. So they don't want to have that bad publicity either.
I'm sure.
So, and my husband, when I said to him, look, I have to go into therapy. And it may change me a lot. I don't know, but I just want you to be aware that there could be a lot of changes coming down the road. And he said, I want to go with you. And that was wonderful, because we had a very rocky road through our relationship, and cultural differences and, all of that stuff. It was really, really helpful for us. And it also sort of made me more and more passionate about doing therapy, because it helped us so much. But I can't remember what your question was. Oh, about passive and aggressive.
How about, is it always good that they're on the opposite side? One is passive, one is aggressive.
Yeah, because this is not my first marriage. My first marriage, I was very young. I was a child of the 60s, so I was protesting and I was doing all that sort of stuff, and I had a real thing about social justice and, all that sort of thing. My husband was also aggressive.
Oh.
And it became violent. And it only lasted a couple of years, but in that time I had a baby. So it was, it was a lot to handle. But I didn't understand it until really I got into therapy and I started looking at that idea of personality and realized that that we were just battling it out, because he was always competing with me and I was competing with him, I think, too.
I can see like a big fight there.
It was we were just banging our heads against the wall all the time. He also obviously had a problem because he went on to abuse other women. So he had, we were so young, didn't get what was going on. It was kind of a volatile time as well. The 60s, 70s were in America, and especially in California, they were raging. So there were a lot of issues. But the thing that I counsel people for, like what I hear from women all the time, and 99% of the couples that I've seen have been aggressive woman, passive man.
Oh.
Because society doesn't get it. We as women, if we're aggressive women, then we're a bitch.
Yes.
If you're
everything negative.
Yeah. If you're in leadership, then, oh, she's just a bossy old bag. And, those sorts of things, where if it's a man, it's like his leadership is really strong,
Very masculine.
Yeah. And the same with men, like in my country, we say, step up to the plate and grow a pair, that thing of like, bring your aggressive behavior. Well, half of the population of men are passive. And so when they're told to step up, they can't do it. It's not in their nature to do that. They don't push boundaries. They aren't crusaders. Yes, half of them are, but half of them aren't. And then they begin acting out of insecurity because they can't live up to the expectations that society puts on them. And, the same for women. If you're an aggressor and you're told to shut up all the time, you're going to eventually develop psychology from that, because you're not being able to speak your truth. You're not being able to push your boundaries, which is what
an
aggressors do.
Yes.
I had at one time, I had a whole bunch of people from the UN and women, and they were all aggressors because they're crusaders. They're pushing the boundaries of what we settle with, and then they push it out a little bit of what we could be. And those sort of things, if you're told to shut up all the time when you have that inclination, it's very, very difficult.
You cannot really express yourself 100%.
Yeah. And it's the same with men, of being able to say, well, I don't know what to do, or that scares me, or, those kinds of things in relationships. So once women become aware and men become aware of who they are personality-wise, it becomes a lot easier to deal with the relationship, because a lot of times women don't accept their talents. You know, for instance, for me, like my husband now, I'm married in multicultural, so I was living in England. There was huge amounts of expectations on me, or his family would just kind of go, "Oh, she's American," and so I wasn't being listened to or accepted for who I was. I felt anyway. I felt like, of course we're different,
Yes.
but they sort of didn't accept that difference, or they made a big deal out of it and just kind of sidelined me because, oh, I'm American, So my husband said to me one time, "Why do you expect?" Because I kept saying, "Will you please stick up for me sometimes?" And he said, "How can I stick up for you? I can't even stick up for myself."
Oh, wow.
And that was really the epiphany of our relationship. It really had a turning point at that point. And he said, "Kerry, you've got the biggest mouth on the planet. Why don't you stick up for yourself?" And I went, "Well, yeah, I mean, there were a lot of signals of saying, oh, no, everything for a quiet life, and don't say that, and don't say that." I had come into that place with that. But when I could step over that and go, "No, I'm going to stick up for myself," everything in our relationship changed. And because that's what I'm good at, that's my talent.
Exactly. And
And
that was good that you actually knew about it.
yeah, well, I mean, it was pretty obvious.
Yeah, I mean, during the time.
But, for him to just say, "I'm a passive person. I can't do those things. I want everyone to love me." I mean, there's bits of passivity that, they can't handle people. They can't handle being wrong, because then people will not trust them or love them. My husband, because he's extreme passive, he needs people to love him all the time. If somebody doesn't like him, if somebody doesn't like me, I just go, "Well, okay, I'll listen to maybe the reason and see if it's something that I want to take on. And maybe I did go too far, or I'm too loud, or I'm too whatever." But if they don't even know me and they don't like me, it's like, who
Who
cares?
cares?
Just their opinion, and I can't be bothered wasting time on it. But for him, it's
Totally
like,
different.
because everybody loves him. He doesn't give anybody any jip. He doesn't call anybody on their stuff. He doesn't set boundaries very well. People use him. People take advantage of him. So they love being around him because, he just doesn't offer any resistance. But it takes its toll as well. Being passive is hard.
For sure.
Scary.
Yes. Yes. Kerry, you've been mentioning about relationships all throughout. What do you think will be, because I'm sure you've heard also, like in interviews, they always ask, what are the key for successful relationships? So how about you, Kerry, with your experience, knowledge, what do you think will be, it can be one, it can be two, it can be three, it can be five. Do you think are the...
Okay, the first one would be, I think, that passive and aggressive. Understand who you are in the relationship and be able to see that person within that framework, of what their capabilities are, what their talents are. I mean, my husband's talents are that he can bring people together because everybody loves him. He can bring people together. He can, sometimes if I'm struggling with a client or something, I will never divulge who it is or what the story is, but I'll say, if you knew somebody that was like this and they were putting up this kind of resistance, what would you do? Because he has a different way of approaching things, a very softer, more chilled attitude about it. And it's wonderful, because to me, a good relationship has the deepness of intimacy, but it's also that those differences are adding to one's own talents. So to see him and how he deals with stuff is a resource for me. And to me, that's what a good relationship is, that those differences become resources.
And you
And they're
complement
not,
each other.
yes. And it's most people that end up in front of me are not, they're not seeing it that way. They're not seeing that, for instance, women with a passive husband, they're not seeing it that, that they have talents that they bring because, you, as an aggressor, you're out there problem solving all the time, and,
Yes.
you get results all the time. The more passive people tend not to, it's not as obvious until you look at the deeper part of it. So I would say that would be the big thing, is understanding passive and aggressive personalities and where you stand in that. And in some people, it's not an issue because they're both very close to the middle. By the way, if you get two passives together, they get bored.
I can imagine that. And I think nothing will happen. Both of them are not expressing
Yeah.
anything in the relationship.
Yeah. And I've had one couple like that, and they had jobs that were very quiet and introverted anyway. And they came to me and they presented their relationship to me. And this is, okay, both of them described that they loved each other, that, different aspects of the relationship. And I just thought, oh God, these people are two passive people and they're just bored. So what I had them do was go out separately into the world, which they didn't do very often, which was kind of good to send them out. I sent them out to meetups of whatever they were interested in. Like if one thought, oh, I'd always like to learn about photography, or I've always liked to do yoga, or whatever, to find a meetup that they go separately to. And then they come back and they share their experiences, because that tends to be what passive and aggressive people do. Quite often the aggressor is out there, and then they'll come back and share their experiences and points of view, to that. The other thing I would say is, so it's, understanding the passive and aggressive and how society views it, and, going through the background of what that is in your own life, what the messages were, like my mother saying, oh, go find a man. Then I would say also to understand that we're in the time of the psychological relationship. We have expectations of that person. And this is really true in the time of COVID, that, okay, there are lovers, there sometimes father-mother figures, there sometimes political pundits, there entertainment, that person is supposed to provide all that stuff for me. Well, no, it's too much expectation. It's too much for that person, to provide. And so if there's something, if that your partner's not that entertaining, that you don't share the same jokes or something like that, then you go find friends that do. But you don't go find another relationship based on that. And that's
which happens.
A lot of times that will happen. They'll just say, well, I'm bored. Well, that's your responsibility. If and I always say, if there was love once at the beginning, you can always get it back. It's just a matter of having to work on it. And usually it has, when I'm doing couples therapy, it's a certain amount of couples things, like communication. Date night's always a big deal.
Yeah.
And with the sexual element, sex therapy in there, because a lot of people, they'll get bored. Men especially will get bored because the sexuality is boring. And so once you do sensate focus, the sensate focus ends with a very deep kind of sex, like almost tantric sex. And so it's where you spend a lot of time, you have a lot of sensuality, you have a lot of intimacy in there. And a lot of times when men get to that point, to the end point, they'll go, wow, I never knew sex could be so good. Well, that's because you're actually spending time with it. You're gathering expertise at it instead of just let's have sex in 10 minutes, it's over and that's it, which I know, a lot of people are really busy. They have kids or whatever their constraints are. But that's why date night has become such a
Yeah, especially now with social media, Facebook, Instagram, and all this stuff. Actually, my next question, Kerry, is how important sex in a relationship, in a couple?
It's probably it's the glue that keeps it together. And if it goes, I mean, it's like I once dated a guy who had been in a car accident and he was in a wheelchair. And I dated him for quite a while. And, my mom used to say to me, my mother was always with her jewels of wisdom, and I was a nurse, I was used to being around people who had physical problems. I myself have a physical problem. So, it was like, he's just a great guy. And she said, this relationship scares me. And I said, why? And she said, because if you marry him, you're going to have a sexless marriage. And number one, it wasn't really true, but also without getting into the details of that, but if you're prepared for it in your mind and you have ways of dealing, self-pleasuring or things like that, that's okay. You're psyched up for it. But if you go into a relationship, which most people do, which is highly sexed, and then it starts falling off and then it gets into nothing, well, there's going to be a lot of hurt and resentment built up around that. And then, like I said, some people really like makeup sex, and so they fight just to be able to make up. And, there's all kinds of ways that we deal with sex, mainly because we're not very open about it. We can't talk about it very easily. One of the things that Masters and Johnson wanted was that, you could talk about the sex you had last night as if it were like, what kind of jam do you want for your toast? That it should just be this normal, I really like that, but I could have used it longer, or I really like it when you touch me there, but I don't really like it when you touch me there. Those kinds of just communication about sexuality, and we don't do that. We're embarrassed by it. And, the weirdest, not weird, but the sort of thing that I came across a lot in cheating was that the first thing that if there was a hint of that there might be another woman or that the relationship was going sour, is the woman would usually withdraw and then he would go find it somewhere else. Or if he was already finding it somewhere else, he wouldn't be available. And so the sexuality then drops off to nothing. And it might be like 2 years. And then they're coming to therapy and they're wanting to work on it and re-engage and, work on their relationship. To get them to engage again, they're both embarrassed. It's like they're starting over.
Like it starts from zero, from scratch.
Yeah.
Again.
And so there's an embarrassment factor. They're not comfortable. They think like if there's cheating gone on, then they think that it's, oh, I've forgiven you because I'm having sex with you. It's not like that. And so that's why Sensate Focus is so wonderful, because it starts from the beginning again. It strips everything away to the very beginning. And you have a date night. It's more like a date. And then you go to bed together and you just touch with no genitalia. And so it's nice. And, it's a slow advancement into penetration. And that's a brilliant thing to watch, because that embarrassment starts breaking down, and it's, sex is so loaded at that point. It just kind of gets rid of all the baggage and you just start from the beginning and go forward. And so it's wonderful to see.
Nice. But is it possible for a couple to have a sexless relationship and still happy?
I think so. I mean, I wouldn't want it, but I think it's possible if you have really good communication. And, to say that to understand that it's not, I don't know how else to say it, but it's not normal.
Yes,
We are meant to be sexual beings,
that's right.
and there's something that is holding one of the persons back and the other one has to accommodate. Then I would say work on the thing that's holding the other person back and get to a point of having sexuality. If there's a reason, like my guy that I dated who was paraplegic, obviously you know what you're getting into from the very beginning. So
Correct.
you understand it and you're willing to accommodate that because it's all out in the open. But a lot of times when people are saying, well, we don't have sex, it will send alarm bells to me. And
True.
I will start working in the direction of, let's talk about this. Let's go slowly. Let's have this be a thing. I've had homosexual couples who weren't comfortable with their sexuality, and so there wasn't very much sex at all.
Oh,
And even though what was driving them to be in this same-sex relationship, like one person wouldn't be very comfortable with it, and it usually was parallel with people who hadn't come out. Who
still in the closet.
yeah, still in the closet, hadn't come out to their families. So they had a lot of guilt connected with it. And so then, they couldn't really perform or didn't want to perform. They had suppressed it for so long that, and if usually you end up being with a person who's opposite.
Wow.
Yeah, so I think I usually, if the couple comes and they say, well, we just don't have sex anymore, but that's not what we're here for, I wouldn't probably take that as an okay message. I would think in myself, okay, we'll get there,
Yeah. It's like they just cannot, or maybe they are not open yet to talk about it.
Yeah, that there's also psychology going on, like I said, I've had women who you get down into the weeds of what's really going on and they've been sexually abused. And then a PTSD protocol comes into play.
Yeah.
It's not sex therapy at that point, it's PTSD. Because, a lot of women, like with vaginismus or something like that, it's childhood trauma that is driving the car. And am I always successful at getting through that? No. Sometimes not. People are who they are and they have to be willing and wanting that thing.
Or else it's not going to be successful.
No. And I have had people get in touch with me years later and say, I finally made the change. It might not be sexuality, it might be something else, but I finally made the change. And I kept hearing your voice in my head. And I realized, yes, but they didn't do it with me, So everybody's on their own time scale. It's not that there is the right way of being, no, it's whatever they want in their lives and they're willing to work for it comes into play.
Yeah. Only themselves can really help. Of course, other people like sex therapies or couple therapies, we can you can help, but somehow it's them who really decides when is the right time.
We can only change ourselves, only.
Correct.
And
yes.
Sometimes people come and they lay out their whole bunch of stuff to me, and kind of look at me like, okay, so what do I do now? And I'm very directive. So those people tend to, we connect well, because I'm like a strategist, it'll be like, okay, let's try this, and this. If you really want this, try these things and see if it works. We'll do it one at a time kind of thing. And, but it's got to be, I'm not the one that judges when it's right or when to stop or, anything like that. No, I'm just a conduit to a lot of stuff that I know.
I totally agree with that. Yes, of course. We've been talking about a lot about sex, relationships, about men, about women, homosexuals, lesbian. If there's one greatest lesson, Kerry, that you've learned from your experience as a sex therapist or couple therapist, which one is it?
It's the personality thing.
Wow.
I know that sounds kind of boring. You know?
No, but I believe as I listen to you and you explain that, it seems like it's really the key.
I keep saying to my husband, I'm going to write a book about that because it's totally anecdotal. There's nothing written about it. You know, there's personality theory, which is a big, complicated. I find it
Confusing.
yeah, I find it unusable in actually doing therapy because it's too complicated. And there's so many aspects of personality, but to just, you know, completely go down to the lowest level and say passive or aggressive has really worked for me. And I've seen it work for a lot of people to just start to understand, number one, what your personality traits are and what your talents are connected to those personality things. And the passivity, if you're a passive person, that it's okay. That it's not, you know, it's
Nothing wrong with that.
no,
There's
you're
nothing
not
wrong with
less
being
than.
passive. Yes.
Yeah, you're not less than. You just have other kinds of talents that society doesn't particularly notice because, you know, everybody's go-getting all the time. And so that passive person, I had a family one time where the guy was a stay-at-home dad and he had had an IT business before that. And his wife was a real go-getter. She was something else. And she had a very thriving business here in Thailand. And when I would talk to them, she was quite unhappy with the relationship. There was a lot of psychology with her that really didn't have much to do with him. She wasn't disappointed that he was passive. She liked it because he stayed home with the kids. But he, you know, when I said he was kind of bored, I think, and as far as I can remember, this is going back a long, long time ago. And I said, well, do you want to work? Do you want to get a job? You know? And he said, nope.
Wow.
Have no desire to work whatsoever, you know.
He was very happy and fulfilled with what he was doing.
He didn't want the pressure. He was very passive. He didn't want to make decisions. He was not a leader type. And by the way, leader types are not just the proviso of aggressive people. I've worked with some wonderful, and I, you know, go on and on about how wonderful they are because they're not like me, you know. So I look at them and go, whoa, you know, that's so wonderful. These passive leaders that get loads and loads done. They're very linear. They talk to everybody because basically they're scared of making the decision on their
Correct.
own.
Yes.
You know, what if everybody hates me because I've made this decision? So they're very linear. They're very interactive with their teams. I've seen them just be brilliantly successful. The trick is for them to know when the time is to be able to step up and go, okay, I've got to make a decision now. And understand the timing, that they can't just keep putting it off and putting it off and putting it off, but to know where that point is. They're really good leaders because they don't get particularly angry. You know, they're taking everybody's information in and different ideas and stuff like that. And so they're very successful. The problem with aggressive leaders, and I'm a leader type, and I've been in leadership roles, I tend to get too angry and then I blurt stuff out, you know, that is
I can
not
sense
right.
that, Kerry.
Yeah, I'm not the right time. It's, you know, it's not going to be helpful in the situation. It's not solution oriented particularly. It's just anger. And so I've worked all my life on my anger because it's been there since I was born. It's part of that aggressive, that highly aggressive kind of thing.
Done with the couples. What advice can you give, especially now during this time of COVID situation wherein people work from home? What can you advise to individuals?
It is so stressful, you know, like I was seeing quite a few people, even after I closed my practice, people that I'd had before, and usually families with lots and lots of problems. um, it all just kind of dropped off because the kids were home and nobody had time. They didn't have time to even think about themselves. And a lot of times when I would check in with them, they'd been fighting, they'd been, but they just didn't have time for therapy. It just wasn't available. And then some of them didn't have the money anymore. So, those in the time of COVID, it's just been such a stressful thing for everybody. I just got my second vaccination of Pfizer, and I didn't even realize it because we live out in the middle of the jungle. We don't really see many people. It was not a big hardship on us to confine ourselves. I've got underlying medical issues. So does my husband. So, it was scary for us to be out there and about. And so we have a maid. And so we all just kind of hunkered down and it was okay. But once I got that second injection, I felt like, I don't have to be scared when we go to macro anymore. I still mask up and all of that. So there is still a fear level, but that relief of just a little bit of relief is a big deal. And I didn't even realize it. I didn't realize that I was stressed out about it, but I was.
Until your second vaccination.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think this has been such a difficult time. And, to say one answer about, well, what would my advice be?
Yes.
It would be something like communicate more, listen to each other, but it's like somebody would say, be happy,
Yes. But that's for couples. But how about, Kerry, for those who are individuals, the single ones?
Yeah.
How can they have that still healthy sex life, if I may say, even if they are singles?
Yeah, I don't know. To tell you the truth, I don't know. Because what the government came out with, was to wear gloves.
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to work. So I think people still have been sexually active, probably not as much. And certainly the sex trade is not here anymore. And, it's really calmed down. I think a lot of people are having like internet sex and things like that.
Have you heard about those kind of things? Internet sex?
Yeah. I hear it on the news every once in a while that a lot of the pat pong people and the nana people, they now have gone online.
I can't imagine what is an internet sex.
Oh, you got to do what you got to do, I guess, But I've always said too that I kind of reprimand men occasionally, like if they're very sexually active, or those men who are kind of serial cheaters and that sort of thing. I will always say to them, where's your creativity? Why can't you pleasure yourself and fantasize? Because the fantasy is always better than the reality anyway, because you can go anywhere you want to be. You can be with anybody you want to be with, where is that in you? It's just so easy, especially here, just to go down to nana, instead of creating that thing in yourself, which is, it's a very creative mind that can have, visual fantasies of whatever turns you on. Now I get, that we all crave the tactile, the intimacy
part of it. Yes.
Person, but right now you can't do that. So, increase your ability to fantasize.
Be creative.
Yeah, exactly. And then you can have exactly what you want as well. I mean,
yes. Kerry, I truly enjoyed this conversation with you, and I've learned a lot. Yes. For two last questions. One is, of course, you already said that if you're going to write a book, you're going to write about being passive.
Well, I don't know if I will.
I hope you will. A lot of people will learn. But a lot of people will learn, I'm sure, from that book. Aside from that, if you're going to write a book about sex that everyone can really benefit from, what will be that book, or what would be that book?
Well, there's so many books written about sex. I don't think that I would write something about sex itself. There would probably be a part of it in there. Um, this book that I always say that I'm going to write, I'm always thinking in terms of writing it for the perspective of a new therapist, because I know how I felt, like you have all these things that you've learned, for me, over 5 years of learning experience of, and now what do I do with it? And a lot of times people stick to one theoretical structure, like cognitive behavioral. Cognitive behavioral is the easiest one. So a lot of people come out with, CBT. And my university was predominantly CBT. And I use CBT quite often. But I feel like I'm more creative than that. So I'm eclectic. Whatever I find that works for somebody, I'll like think and think and think, well, maybe that'll work. And that, that kind of thing of having strategies, lots and lots of strategies, I would say, for these new therapists is trust yourself, trust your gut feelings and trust that, all the stuff you've learned, there's other stuff in there besides CBT.
There are other things.
Yeah, there are other things, and maybe not very traditional things, like I use EFT a lot, just tapping. I use hypnosis. And I've been trained in all these things. So, I do think that people should have proper training in these things, not just, I think I'll try this kind of thing.
They should be professional enough.
I think is an important thing. The sexual part of it, I would say, realizing sex is a very small part of sexuality, that sensuousness is important. The going deeper and deeper into your relationship, and that takes humility. It takes being vulnerable. It takes all those things. And if you're not somebody who can do that easily, then learn how to do that easily. Go into vulnerability. Learn that, a mistake is just a learning experience. It's not really a mistake unless you keep repeating it. To ask questions of your partner, does this feel good to you? Do you like it? Should I do it harder or softer? What do you feel like tonight? Do you feel like being nurtured, or do you want jungle sex? And understand that most of the time you're not going to be on the same page.
Yes.
So, I always ask the question to people, what if your partner comes in and she wants jungle sex and you just need to be nurtured and said, they're there now, what would you do? What would you do? And most women would say, oh, well, I'll just do whatever he wants,
they just become followers.
Yeah.
They don't express what they want.
No, you can have what you want and they can have what they want. And what you do is you pleasure each other separately. That's still sex, and it can still be really intimate. So, sex is a gift. And
I like that when you said that sex is
in that way, it's not just about what's going to get you off, but what is going to be the best thing, number one, for us, but also for that person. What is it they want? You don't just capitulate and say, okay, we're going to have jungle sex when you really need to be nurtured. No, you bring them off first, and then they're more apt to nurture you because there's not that desire going on, that high desire. So I would say that, that's would definitely be in that book.
Yeah,
You're very good at this, Arnie.
Oh, thank you so much. My last question, Kerry. What advice can you give to the young people about sex? Because I don't think that after a month, after a year, or even 2 years, that these young people will be sexually educated. Because I think we lack, especially in Asia, we lack of sexually educated educators. So what advice can you give to these young people in order for them to have that proper attitude, behavior, and beliefs about sex?
I would just say, accepting yourself and who you are, and developing that intimacy with yourself. And okay, there is this barrier to pleasuring yourself here, which is a real pity, because that's how you learn about yourself and how you develop that sensuality of yourself, of being sensual, that you can be sensual with yourself. You can be sensual with a friend having coffee. That sensuality is not necessarily a sex act, but it's part of enjoying yourself as a sensual person. And I think a lot of times, especially young people, we're trying to be what the other person wants us to be all the time, instead of being who we are.
Correct. Yes.
And it's misleading, because if you're pretending to be a sex kitten and you get together with somebody who thinks that's who you are, and then that's not really who you are, and it falls away after a while, then there's going to be problems. So to understand, and maybe you're a person who isn't particularly sensuous or doesn't feel, that sexuality is a really important deal. I would say, be honest about that, because it might be that you have to work that accommodation out before you get together in a couple. And maybe there's space for you to become more sensual once you accept, this other person who might be very sensual around you. You'll become, that person will become a resource for you. But, it's very hard to talk about young people about sexuality, because they're so highly hormoned that, it's like, okay.
It's a totally different story.
It is. And, when I think back about what I was like when I was young, and it was so long ago, it's like, oh, yeah, of course that was how, sometimes I watch movies and go, but why would they do that? Oh, yeah. Okay, I remember.
Those were the days.
Yes.
They become a reminder of what it used to be.
Yeah. But I think, I think there's a lot of role playing and a lot of persona, being a persona, instead of just figuring out who you are. And that does come with age. Not everybody gets there, but it gets more, more part of reality if you do that, and if you did it when you were young, wow, that would be really cool. I do have very, very young clients, and I used to have a lot of teenagers, but that was a whole other thing. There was a lot of cutting and, trauma involved in that. But the sort of young adults in their 20s, they, in therapy, they do that. A lot of them quite often will make that transition into thinking a bit deeper, and not just, letting their bodies drive the car. They'll think in different ways and go deeper with people. And eventually you'll find somebody who thinks deeper like that too. You'll attract what you are doing. And so,
That's right.
it becomes a better relationship. Whereas, I see people who've had lots and lots of failed relationships, and it's usually because they're creating a persona.
Thank you so much. Very well said. Thank you for your time, your knowledge,
You're welcome.
your wisdom, I should say, about this. I'm sure it's not only me, but all the listeners also learn from that. Thank you so much, Kerry. So listeners, life mates, if you really like this episode, please share to your family and friends, subscribe, and listen to my next episode. It's been wonderful. And thank you so much, Kerry.
Thank you
so
Arnie.
much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.